I don't want to take too much time in my closing statements because I do want to save a little bit of time at the end for us to answer some questions that we've received in the meantime that I promised people we would get back to. So if I don't get to your question, I said to get back to you, just put in the comments and be like, hey, don't forget about me. But I want to start with some of the things that I agree with. And I think that's important because we're not enemies with Passio here. None of the people on camera here think Passio is a deplorable person who should be silenced or who is just saying just the most god-awful things that should not be put out to all of these people or anything like that. In fact, without knowing the exact background of everybody on this platform, I'm sure we agree with 90%, if not more, of the conclusions that he reached to some degree. If we were having a casual campfire or bar conversation, as he alluded to in one of his analogies, I'm sure we would just have a grand time talking about the state and individual sovereignty and whatnot and getting into the intricacies together. I'm sure it would be a great conversation. I liked one thing that I wish he had done a little bit more, but I still am going to give him credit for because I think it was close enough that I haven't seen a lot of people talking about philosophy do, is he mentioned this state of chaos. And one big thing for me in philosophy is talking about the state of nature, because in my works, I think the state of nature is an integral part of the formation of any ethical system. And without consideration of it, I don't think you can really build an ethical system at all to begin with. That's my opinion. But his state of chaos is eerily similar. He didn't go into like the largest definitions of it, but in good faith, I'm going to say it's pretty damn close to what I would call a state of nature. And I'm going to assume that if we could have him here to talk about it, it would be almost identical. Just based off of the way he talked about it. So I liked that he brought that up. Now, onto some of the things I didn't like. And I think there might be a little repetition between us, but I think maybe that'll just drive the point home because repetition seems to be a common trend across this presentation. He lost me. We have a running list in Monk of Jesus. We have a running Google Doc, which you can find in the description, which we put out pretty detailed notes for part 1 and 2. We kind of trailed off in part 3, but that was more applied ethics, so that wasn't really paramount to the discussion that we were having. But point 6, I'm sorry, my contacts are a little foggy right now because it's so late. Point 8 on our list of things is where pretty much Passio lost me. And that is, there exists universal and spiritual laws. To me, I can accept a lot of premises that can be substantiated later, or things that can be either inferred, perhaps even, or just taken at face value that can be addressed later in arguments. But whenever you're making a claim like this, it has to be substantiated. So to me, this was like the first little red flag that popped up. There exists universal and spiritual laws. There has to be some kind of evidence for that, right? This is just the rules of rationalization suggest that I should expect evidence for all of these things, but in good faith, this is kind of where I draw the line. Like I was willing to accept the occult knowledge stuff, everything like that. Another thing that both I was excited for and mildly concerned me is that about an hour into the conversation, Passio said that this was a master key to unlock all of the knowledge, a complete body of work. So this presentation is supposed to be taken as everything you need to know to understand natural law. I think my further comment, I won't speak more on that point. I think my further comments will kind of address some of the criticisms that I have with that statement in particular. A couple more specific point things before I get into the general. The 8 total principles, which constitute the master key to universal wisdom, were all entirely just assertions. They were just things put out there that he said, these are the keys. If you understand these things, you will have total knowledge that you need to universal wisdom. And from then on, everything else will just kind of make sense and fall into line and be great. I was very not happy with the unsubstantiated claims there. I can deal with a lot of unsubstantiated claims, but in the points that are super critical by his own words to understanding this concept of natural law, I had an issue with that. And the last thing that I want to really harp on before I turn it over is that his conceptions of morality and the way he talks about morality and the way he applies morality were not only unsubstantiated, but just go in the face of pretty much every understanding anyone has. And I'm not saying this to be mean. I'm just saying this to be like really honest and truthful to you guys about my takeaways from this. It's just very much so not what any learned or respected person has on these topics. And that is a big problem, because this is an ethical system. And if you can't talk about morality in a way that is not only valid and sound, but is cogent as well, you're going to have a really hard time coming with any sort of reasonable conclusions to your ethical system, which is basically what all of part 3 was just a bunch of applied ethics, which is why we didn't do as much commentary on those. So I think those are my like really big takeaways. Maybe we can get into the nitty gritty a little bit later, but yeah, I think that's what I've got to say for now.
Jim?
Well, first of all, since we're in a new day.
Good morning. Sunday morning.
So I went into this thinking that we were going to have a big discussion about natural rights, natural law. I had been preparing for it. I read a book about it just to make sure that I was up on my game when it came to natural law. And after starting listening to some of the things that were in this thing, I realized that I was going to be kind of going in blind, even though I just got read up reading on natural law. So that was kind of interesting. I'll dig into a little passage from this, which I found interesting later on. But I'm going to kind of echo a lot of the same things. So I'm going to keep it kind of brief of what Christian was saying, because I think he kind of nailed it. There was a lot of things that he was saying for someone who was claiming that this is some sort of science, that this is objective truth, that all of these things were undeniable. It would be helpful for them to be substantiated in some way, either with some sort of empirical evidence or some sort of rational argument to show that this was true. However, we didn't get any of that. The closest we got was kind of like arguments from etymology. One of the things that really bugs me about that, besides it being a logical fallacy, is that you can pretty much kind of make arguments about pretty much anything, and some of these things weren't even accurate representations of the etymology of the words he was using, specifically government, which even still, I mean, don't get me wrong, I'm not a big fan of government, to say the least. I'm quite the unfan. However, to say that they're mind control because of the etymology of it doesn't make a whole lot of sense when we can actually show some of the things that they do, like milieu control, loading of the language, and sort of things like that actually show there is some sort of thought reform behavior that the state engages in, not just in the United States, but a lot of this stuff was kind of based in even cult tech, even like not a cult, cults, how cults mind reform people. Originally, all that kind of stuff was done investigating Chinese prisoners of war, which that stuff could have been really interesting to dig into as far as how the state uses it today. One of the things that also really bothered me quite a bit was not just the definitions of things, but how he defined natural law. And a lot of things were kind of very unclear. And it wasn't until like later on where things started getting unpacked that I actually understood what he was trying to argue, specifically that when he was comparing natural law to physics and how you can't really break the laws of physics or thermodynamics, but you could somehow break the natural law and violate other people's rights. And then it wasn't until later that you realize that, okay, the mechanism that stops you from doing it is karmic law. A lot of things that really bothered me is just the obsession with misrepresenting Satanism. He probably is was probably some sort of a member of a group that called himself a satanic church. However, if you're really interested in what Satanism is, I highly recommend you check out the Satanic Bible. It's not going to hurt you. You can read it critically and get an understanding of what it is. It's a really great book, and you only have to read half of it because the other half are just a bunch of satanic rituals, which is explained in the book. And it's a really interesting read, and you can get a lot out of it. In fact, there's a really good chapter about psychic vampires. I highly recommend, even to people who are the most ardent Christians. But either way, a misrepresenting of also other terms like consequentialism, which now I'm probably going to end up having to deal with some of the fallout from that. Also being called a utilitarian, just because I use that moniker, that's also a little bit problematic. And again, like a lot of the stuff was just really unsubstantiated, and especially some of the things that I really wanted to understand in terms of his construction of natural law. Now, if you're really interested in what natural law is historically, what it has evolved to today, and what it is in terms of libertarianism, I can give you some recommendations of people to read if you are really interested in the pro-natural law arguments. If you really want to, Rand would be a good start. Rothbard, Samuel Konkin has also written a lot of this stuff as well, and a lot of their kind of devotees have also kind of expanded on this as well. But one of the things I did want to read from this book, The Myth of Natural Rights, where he's quoting George Smith. So when libertarians claim that coercion is contrary to natural law or the nature of man, they must realize, aside from the truth or falsity of this assertion, that such an appeal to nature places them in a confused and nebulous political tradition. And L.A. Rollins adds, confused and nebulous indeed. Also highly recommend this book once you actually dug into the real arguments for natural law, to give that a look as well. And you can also see the back and forth between Rothbard, Konkin, and some of the other people that he was rebutting in that. By the way, if you're ever in Texas, go to Buc-ee's and try the beaver nuggets and the ghost pepper jerky. And this is not a paid sponsor, I swear to God.
All right, my turn. Okay. This is my summary. Summary is broken down into parts. Sum, which can mean use. Airy in summary can mean negation. So negation of use is kind of what we're talking about here. Another way of saying negation of use is useless. Another way of saying useless would be junk. What we have experienced here today is why I titled the stream, The Junk Science of Natural Law. Here's my summary. I want to believe as many true things as I can, and I want to believe as few false things as I can. In an attempt to achieve that, I have standards of reason and evidence that must be met before I consider something to be true, and below which I consider something to be false. I do not believe it. Passio, his conclusions are mostly good. I'm just going to repeat everything that everybody else has said so far because it's true. Mostly good. We could sit at a bar. We'd agree. We'd probably make great neighbors. Honestly, if Passio is my neighbor, I would probably get along so much better with him than I do with any of the neighbors anywhere near my house right now. We would agree on so much, and we would probably live peacefully for the rest of our lives together. There was a few disagreements in his conclusions that we probably wouldn't agree on. Lies as a form of theft, invalid forms of property, veganism. Certainly, I've made a lot of content on that. Certainly, I disagree with his conclusions on that. But, I mean, for the most part, we'd be fine. In the beginning of this presentation, Passio told us that we should be skeptical of our information sources. So I'm going to do him the honor of being skeptical of him as a source of information. And that's what we've been doing this whole time. He says that harmful behavior in the aggregate results in a less desirable or successful society. And that's kind of like his entire thesis in a sentence, is that in the aggregate, harmful behavior results in a more harmful society, a less successful, a less desirable society. The more harm you have, the worse your society will do. And the less harm you have, the more prolific and prosperous your society will be. I don't dispute this. But we have entered the ring of philosophy. We have elevated our standards to those of reason and evidence and accuracy and precision in our language and in our thought process. And that does not require, that sentence, harmful behavior in the aggregate results in a more desirable or successful society, does not rise to his own claim that it forms a set of universal, inherent, objective, non-man-made, eternal, and immutable conditions which govern the consequences of behavior and of beings with the capacity for understanding the difference between harmful and non-harmful behavior. Those words that he used in the context of philosophy, in the context of natural law and moral philosophy and ethics that we're talking about here, it doesn't meet that standard. It just doesn't. There's too much subjectivity in there. There's too much. What constitutes harm? Who decides? For some, harm people would be appreciative of. I know when I go to my doctor and ask him to cut me open, he's harming me in a way that I really, really want him to. What constitutes a successful or preferable society? People's opinions are going to be almost as many opinions as there are people on what this stuff means. And the subjectivity built into the language that he uses is one of the biggest defeaters of his own standard that we're supposed to rise to in this discussion. We have not been given a universal, inherent, objective, non-man-made, eternal, and immutable situation or a philosophy. We haven't. Another one of the big problems that I have is something that came up constantly. It goes something like this: if you don't understand where words come from or came from and what they were intended to mean back in time, back in history, regardless of modern connotations, those original meanings are still important somehow. They still affect you somehow. It's like they're magic spells. These words are magic spells. They contain power, and even though no one knows what the spells do anymore, when they're cast, they still have the same effect. No evidence was presented for this, which is kind of a theme. He asserts that the original meanings are their real meanings, and that we have no idea what the words we use on a daily basis actually mean and what effects they actually have when we use them. No evidence was presented for that thesis. He says that everything that exists came through thought first. What about thought? No evidence was presented for this. This was another assertion. Free will is based on randomness. No evidence presented for this assertion. Are you getting a theme? Right versus wrong are diametrically opposed and do not exist as constructs in the human mind. Anyone that believes that is engaged in Satanism. No evidence was presented for this thesis. Right equals correct, based in truth, moral, in harmony with natural law, actions based in it do not result in harm to other beings. Why does the word right mean that? No evidence was presented. Wrong means incorrect, not based in truth, immoral, in opposition to natural law, actions based in it result in harm to other sentient beings. Why does wrong mean that? What in nature proves that is what the word wrong means? No evidence was presented for this in this presentation today. Also, especially towards the end of this thing, there were actually through the whole thing, there's some like red flags for manipulative techniques that can be used on an audience that isn't aware of what's going on. I have a little list of them. Talking about occult, forbidden knowledge. This is a sales technique used commonly to get you to buy a package, to get you access to some special training that will, learn this one trick to be successful in the real estate industry. I talked about that briefly earlier. It's amplified when we're talking about occult, forbidden knowledge. I'm not saying that any one of these things on their own is actually a problem. I'm just saying we've got a little red flag here and a little one here and a little one there. Another one is that that it requires this massive amount of study to get it or to understand it or to get involved in it. And if you don't understand it yet, and if you think I'm wrong, it's just because you don't understand it yet and you need to consume more of my content. Cults do that. I'm not saying he's doing it. I'm just saying it's another little red flag. You put enough little red flags together, I start to get more and more worried. Rampant language manipulation, changes to word definitions, word games, and equivocations. Rampant. We've called it out pretty much every time it's happened in this 13 and a half hour stream. It has been everywhere. Some of the definitions have been good, some of them haven't. But I don't care about that. We can totally change the definition of language when we're making a philosophical proof. That's fine. We can change definitions of words for the sake of the conversation as long as we call it out, no problem. But what we can't do is use this etymology. We can't break up the words into pieces and then invert logic and say, well, because this piece of the word used to mean this and that piece of the word used to mean that there's some kind of actual logical, rational connection that then can be used as a proof of some point you're going to make. That's a non sequitur. That doesn't work. Especially towards the end, I think it was G. The word G in apology had a connection to something else he was saying. Therefore, there was some kind of argument there. Nonsense. That's a red flag for somebody that's either non-thinking or trying to trick you. I'm not going to tell you which I think it is. Gaslighting. This is a big one. And I've got this constantly over the past 3 years from his supporters. Gaslighting in the form of, Patrick, if you don't agree, it's because you're not capable of understanding, or your brain is just so unbalanced that you can't. You're telling me that my mental faculties and my ability to reason are insufficient or broken in a way that I can't see the truth in the way you want. It's not a problem with your conception of the ideas involved. No. It's a problem with me. I'm just actually broken. That is manipulation. That is gaslighting. That is what abusive husbands do to their spouses when they complain about getting beat. I'm not saying again that Mark Passio is trying to be abusive. I'm saying it's another little red flag. The last little red flag is that whole thing at the end. We are under attack, and it's us to us. It's up to us as heroes to save this thing. It's another little red flag. That's what cult leader types do. Not saying Passio's doing that. I'm just saying this was a list of red flags that I have for manipulation, possible manipulation techniques that have been in use over the course of this presentation. It was funny at the end, he talked about negative knowledge as the illusion of knowledge. I'm telling you that the last 8 hours, the 13 hours of this was kind of that. It was the illusion of knowledge. He talked a lot, but he didn't back anything up. He said a lot of words. He talked about a lot of stuff, but it was all baseless. It was the illusion that he taught you something. He didn't. Or if he did, it was very little. As Christian said, this was supposed to be everything we needed to understand natural law, and it was precisely almost nothing that we needed to understand his conception of natural law. There is a fallacy called, and so we've been complaining about assertions, we've been memeing about him just making assertion after assertion over and over in this presentation. It's actually a fallacy. It's called the fallacy of bare assertion. Bare as in not based. Not based, not as in not based, but in like not based on anything. It's like if I were to tell you, tomorrow it is going to rain, and you say, how do you know? And I say, Like, why do you care what I'm telling you or what I think if I'm not even worried about backing it up or if I'm not providing any reason or evidence for it? That is the fallacy of bare assertion, and that really should be the title of this video. Honestly, like if I were going to retitle it, I would probably title it The Fallacy of Bare Assertion in 14 Hours. There's a Latin name for the fallacy of bare assertion called ipse dixit. It's true because I say it's true. It's the fallacy of ipse dixit, and I'm probably saying that wrong. Ipse dixit or something like that. Okay, so I guess the last thing I'll say is that this conception of natural law, this philosophy, this ethical framework was not junk science. The title is inaccurate. This was not even science. This was nothing. This was story time with Mark Passio. That's my conclusion. It was nothing more. It was story time with Mark Passio. If it helps you, if it benefits you, if it improves your life, if it gives you a justification to live in a non-aggressive way where you're not hurting people and taking their stuff, more power to you. If it makes you happy, do it, man. If it makes other people happy to talk about, do it. Fine. Go for it. This is not a moral philosophy. This is not. This is not natural law. This is not a science. This is story time with Mark Passio. I'll shut up now.
Where's your mask?
Well, Before we open it up to viewer comments, which I have at least one saved up. Oh, I like that mask, the Bane mask.
It's good, right? It's good.
Yeah. I did want to ask. Well, actually, I'm going to take a little bit more microphone time because I wanted to get everybody's points out there before I did the what was colloquially known as the bro philosophy thing to do, and that is the point number one. Passios started his whole talk off with this. Logical fallacies are invalid forms of rationalization. He started it off by calling out a logical fallacy. And I noticed, at minimum, an equivocation fallacy, or a few, an etymological fallacy, or a couple, well, actually, I'm going to skip that one. Sorry. Begging the question was rampant in his conversation on how natural law and morality apply to each other. Natural law is correct because it is the governing body of morality, and morality is correct because it is governed by natural law. False dilemmas were just all over the place, and I'm sure I missed an unwarranted generalization or two. So again, in an 8-hour conversation, I would expect someone to make one or two fallacies that we could clear up. If they really went over their stuff and they knew what they were talking about, I would almost expect that, and I'd be willing to look it over. But the fact that we, for this, like Patrick said, almost 14 hours we've been on air, have called out many of these multiple times, and not even to go into Patrick's very, very poignant pointing out of the bare assertion fallacy. It's a lot. It's a whole lot for somebody who based the first thing that they talked about was that logical fallacies are an invalid form of rationalization. It's too much. Too much.
Okay. Well, anything else? Any questions? Oh, yeah, let's do this one. I thought this was a good question from the Rising Sun over on Odysee.
Is everybody getting indigestion right now or something?
What'd you say?
What? Is everyone getting indigestion right now?
No, I didn't know Christian was going to stop talking right then, so I had just taken my first big draw of whiskey, and so I was kind of like choking that one down. She said, what is the ultimate evidence that would convince you natural law is true? Who wants to take that one? Jim? You want to go first?
Well, what natural law are we talking about? Are we talking about Rothbards? Are we talking about Conkins? We're talking about Rands? Are we talking about Mark Passios?
We're talking about Passios.
Passios.
What do you think we're talking about? We just spent 13 hours listening to Passios. Why would I ask you about Rothbards?
Well, I would need at least something then.
Oh, okay. Sorry to interrupt. Go ahead.
Well, no, that's it. Like, there would just need to be something. Whereas, like, if we were talking about any of the other ones, it's like, okay, well, it depends on which one we're talking about, because there was a couple problems here and there. Whereas Mark's, it's just, there was nothing there. I wanted something to be there, and there was just nothing. I would just like at least something to at least chew on to get started. All we got was just this, and it's like, well, can we substantiate any of these things? Because a lot of these things that he was claiming were pretty, things that that would require at least some substantiation. It wasn't like, the sky is blue. It's something that were pretty bold claims, and it's like extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence, and we didn't get any evidence, and the claims just kept getting more and more extraordinary. And I would just at least like to have something backing at least something. Even if it's weak, even if the evidence is scant, at least there needs to be at least something there that I could at least chew on. Because I haven't seen any evidence for anything that he's presented whatsoever. Not even the first steps of his argumentation. There was no argumentation. It was just, this is true, and this is also true, and this is also true, and this is also true. And he doesn't even attempt to link these disparate facts together. You just kind of it's just implied that they are, and I don't know what order they are or how they're connected. There was just nothing there, and I would just at least like, instead of having a bunch of disparate facts, I would at least like to have someone pull the yarn between all the conspiracy points to tell me that, you know, so and so wasn't getting their mail, but I didn't even get that. So
for the people that are obviously still not getting it, when you say there was nothing there, and they watch what we just watched, and they see a lot there, what would you say to show the difference between what they saw in that and what we're seeing in that? Because we've all kind of had the same evaluation that there was very little, if not nothing there. But we have some people in chat that follow Passio, and they're giving me the respect of their time and attention on this video, and they think there was a lot there. So why is there a delta?
Okay, so let's just bring this to an analogy of something that I was just recently getting involved with, especially with like the JFK assassination, right? So we can say that Oswald, right, was a communist. He had big issues with JFK. He was always kind of interested in talking about JFK and stuff like that with his wife. The night of the murder, he was quiet during dinner, which was a little bit weird. Or the night before, he showed up with a bag of like shower rods. So all these things kind of sound kind of interesting, but once you start piecing them together and say like, okay, the reason why he was quiet was because he was reserved about possibly wanting to kill the president. He brought a bag of shower rods, which actually turned out to be the murder weapon, and he was using that as an excuse to hide the fact that he was bringing a gun to work, which they didn't allow guns at work. So there was like this pattern that you can build like a narrative on using all of these disparate facts. But if I just give you the disparate facts, you're going to be like, okay, he showed up with some shower rods to work. How does that prove that he killed JFK? There was nothing like that. It was just a bunch of disparate facts, and then you were supposed to put them together somehow. One, I didn't know whether or not any of the information was true. I have no idea. The other one is I don't know how they're connected. I want to know how these things are connected. And when people were in the chat, when we were asking like, how is this connected? A lot of these people were just making these jumps like, well, you know, I don't like to be raped. You don't want to be enslaved. Therefore it's wrong. It's like, well, no, we need that bridge between what is and what ought to be. I don't want to be enslaved. That doesn't mean that it's immoral to enslave me. It just means that I don't want that. You need to make that case what that next leap is to show me that why it's immoral for anybody to do that. We can say that it's unpreferable for most people to do that. We can say that it probably had bad outcomes for that, but that's not the moral gap that was needed there. And especially when we're talking about objective morality, we can't just make a bunch of if-and claims. If he was making a bunch of if-and claims, that would have been completely different. And I probably would have been much more receptive to it. Because the if-and claim, there is a connection, whereas an is-ought, there's nothing. And it was one of those things that we were harping on a lot. And that wasn't even one of the main points that we were talking about. A lot of the stuff was just, here's a fact. Here's a fact. Here's a fact. Well, I don't know if these are facts. A lot of these are kind of really extraordinary claims. I need extraordinary evidence to it. And then I also need to know how that's connected to the next fact over. And you zoomed in right when I was finishing my point.
Because I'm a terrible host. Objectively.
Well, you have more subs than me, so...
Only because you deleted your channel, right?
No.
Christian, did you have any answer to what is the ultimate evidence that would convince you natural law is true?
Yeah, and I'll just be honest. I have a really high burden of proof. I think when, so I came into this with, I have a lot of preconceptions of what natural law is. It just based off of my studies and the different philosophers that I've read and the content that I've consumed and what has helped me form my interpretations of what a good ethical system would be. I had a very different conception of what natural law would be, but it somehow still met the same standards for proof as Passios, because he insisted on, and if you'll give me 1 second to find this, The set of universal, inherent, objective, non-man-made, eternal, and immutable laws. This is a completely different type of natural law than what most philosophers talk about, but it still tries to bear that same burden. And I think that's probably the best way of putting it, is that I wanted evidence of what would 100%, you know what? I won't even say that much. If it was 75, 50% of the way to demonstrating a universal, inherent, objective, non-man-made, eternal, and immutable set of laws, I would be very interested to consume more content, because that would be the closest anybody has ever gotten to meeting that standard. And that's it. I don't place any more burden on what Passios is trying to say than what he put on himself. If he said natural laws are an interesting way of thinking about human psychology, I would place no more burden onto his claims than that. And this whole conversation would have been, well, that was pretty interesting. He talked about a unique way of looking at human psychology and its impacts on like a collective whole. Interesting, right? But he didn't. He set out natural laws as a universal, inherent, objective, non-man-made, eternal, and immutable set of laws. He didn't meet that standard. That's a standard he put on himself. And I'm not gonna walk back that standard, even in good faith. You know what? Actually, in good faith, I should hold him to that standard. It would be bad faith for me to say, well, you know what? He said these things, but he must have not really meant those, because he didn't build that up. It must have just been like an analogy for human psychology. In good faith, I must take his words at face value. And he did not do the work to build this up. I mean, I could go through each of these points and talk about how they weren't. And we've done that a lot through these 14 almost hours of us being on stream, where he's failed to meet these standards. I mean, objective, over and over and over and over again, we have talked about how his claims are unsubstantiated. And I know people are memeing about it in the comments. Not all of you guys. Some of you guys are super cool and are getting the picture. But a few in particular can't get over this hill that an assertion isn't good enough to substantiate something that is objective. It's not. If I sat in front of you, I'll do it right now. The sun is not real. That's an assertion. That's an assertion. I can just say that. I don't have to say a damn thing. It's an assertion. But are you going to believe me? Are you going to sit here and be like, what the fuck? The sun is obviously real. It's in the sky, right? This is the kind of thing that I'm talking about. It seems like there's you know what? I'm not even, the people I'm talking about, I don't even feel bad for saying this. It feels like a bias against us for holding Passio to the standards that he put himself to. And I know I'm deviating a little bit from the topic, but that is my standards. My standards for proof are what Passio put on himself. It's nothing more. Whatever he says it's going to be, I expect him to make it that. If he doesn't, he didn't meet his own standards. And so how can he meet my standards? That's what he told me he was going to do. So
this is not a trivial thing either. Like, if he were to have been right after this 14-hour stream, and I went to bed here in a little bit with this new realization of this new, completely new paradigm on life and reality and how I interact with the world around me and how my behaviors and my consciousness and my thoughts affect my behaviors and my behaviors affect the world around me and the people around me and how successful me and my community are. That would change everything in my life. Everything. It would affect everything. That's so huge. You think I'm just gonna change my life because some asshole on YouTube spent 8 hours telling me his assertions? Come on! Come on! You want to change my entire life? I need evidence! Not insults and not time wasting. I need proof beyond, oh, generally people do better when they hurt each other less. No shit! No shit! Societies do better when they hurt each other less. Got it. Okay. That's not an objective universal philosophy. I'm going to need more than that. That's my answer to what evidence would suffice. I need evidence, and I need a lot of it. I have a high standard of evidence before I change my entire worldview. Please, come on. No, I need an argument. I need a solid proof behind it, and I need a lot of evidence to back it up. It has to be valid, and it has to be sound. Those are my standards of belief.
All right.
Final question.
I have one more question for you guys.
Oh, okay.
One more question.
All right.
But we can get to that last. I really want to make sure the viewers are paid off, especially those of you who sat around for hours and watched us. But I wanted to ask for my own sanity, and I'm not trying to attack Passio here, but did any of you two see a single argument that supported his claims for natural law or how morality is influenced by natural law? A single argument. He's made arguments. I won't contest that. He has made arguments, but towards his central claim, did he make a single argument? Because if he did, I missed it.
If his argument is harmful behavior in the aggregate results in a less desirable or successful society, that's an argument. That's not an argument meeting the standards he laid out for himself. That's an argument. And if that's what he calls natural law, then that's an argument for his conception of natural law.
Jim, I'm
One that I would agree
I'm
with.
genuinely curious. Yeah.
But it'd be one that I agreed with, but I wouldn't define it as an objective moral truth. That what was the exact phrase? Oh, I closed.
Universal, inherent, objective, non-man-made, eternal, and immutable.
Yeah, I would not define it as that. That's just something like kind of like a based base. Well, it's based. It's one of the kind of base, like kind of egoist kind of worldviews. If you treat people nice, generally people are going to be nice to you. And if you're an asshole and you're murdering and killing and stealing, people are going to be like, "Fuck this guy! Get out of my store! Get out of my apartment complex! You're not welcome here anymore. You're not welcome in town. You're kind of be blackballed." That's more than likely going to happen. It's not a universal axiom. It's not going to for sure happen. It's not 100% immutable. It's not 100%, as he claimed over and over again. It's not the case. There's plenty of evidence of people doing bad things and getting away with it all the time. I just need something. I didn't see anything there. I didn't see any real arguments to substantiate. Like he was making some pretty bold claims. I mean, to have an objective morality that solved all of the problems. This is the holy grail of ethics, and a lot of people have attempted it. A lot of people, who are fairly modest, a lot of people who are, aren't so much, to think they slayed the dragon. You probably know who I'm talking about. But a lot of them have failed miserably.
Ladies, you must all be herded into the vat of the fertile women, and you will be impregnated by right-wing Nazis against your will, no matter what, and you will have no way of escaping this, and you will breed the master race no matter what.
You're racist.
Oh wait, that was the wrong one. Sorry,
I interrupted.
Hello.
But yeah, like this is the holy grail, and everybody who has attempted, in my view, has failed miserably. And I'm looking for something. I'm genuinely looking for something. And the only thing that I've been able to find in the interim is things like egoism and consequentialism that kind of makes kind of moral judgments and intuitionism to an extent. But I don't find them as good, like objective morality that, that has slayed the dragon that that has been set out by philosophers of old. And there was just a lot of assumptions there, just a lot of assuming that, well, slavery is bad. I mean, we all wouldn't want to be slaves. Therefore, it has to be moral bad, and we need to go and find reasons why that's bad. And I think that's a bad start. I think that's a really bad start to start out with, here's a bunch of things I dislike or I think are immoral. Let me try to argue my way into proving those things are immoral. I think the better thing is to try to find what's true and then check it against things that I think most people would agree are abhorrent and see if they hold up. It's a good test. It doesn't definitively prove. I mean, we could come up with a universal moral ethical system 100% that, that may allow for certain types of, rapes or something like that. But if that's what the objective moral truth is saying, then we need to stop saying like, well, I find it abhorrent. But that's what the argumentation is, and probably further and maybe dig a little bit deeper and to see whether or not something like that would be forbidden if we improved it. But if it's objective, we don't really care about the outcomes of those things. If it's an objective moral philosophy, right? We don't really care if it ends up proving that stealing is okay in certain circumstances. We would just go, okay, well, according to this moral objective truth that we all can't make a reasonable case against, it says that it's okay to steal in certain circumstances. There we go. Sorry, that's just the way the world works. But we didn't get any of that. We were just told that it's not true. And the only real kind of compelling evidence that we've got against any of those awful things is that we would feel bad if it happened to us. And it would feel bad if it happened to us, but that's not how a moral argument make.
Yeah. And you know what? You guys are both right. That was an argument that he made. So thank you for pointing that out. He did make that argument precisely.
What was the argument?
That the moral actions of individuals have a consequence on the aggregate of society.
The last thing I'm going to comment on from Aaron is to say what he just said. He said, I mean, you guys made up your mind already before you watched. Confession through projection. There was zero chance from the beginning of your engagement with us that you were going to change your mind about a damn thing. We were here engaging, looking for arguments.
Yep.
Anyway.
I kind of went in blind, so I didn't know. So mostly blind. I knew a tiny bit, but not much.
All right. Last and most important question, and then we'll end the stream. Nobody Cares asked, does the beaver onesie have a trapdoor for going number 2?
I wish. No.
All right.
It's got a zipper on the top, right? But it's also got a zipper at the bottom that connects the same zipper. So that's how you do the other one. But now you have to take the whole thing off if you need to make it number 2Z.
So now, from now on, when anybody says, before you critique Mark Passio, you need to watch all of this content and the hours and hours, I will say, no. Before you say I'm wrong, you need to watch my 14-hour live stream where we did this. All right.
Sweating that off my bucket list.
Jim, thank you for joining me. It's been fun. Christian, thank you for joining me.
Always.
It's been fun. You guys are awesome. Everybody watching, you guys are awesome too.